At 10:26 in the morning on June 4, 1942, Japanese Admiral Chuichi Nagumo made a decision. 8 minutes later, 4 aircraft carriers were burning, and the Empire of Japan had lost the war in the Pacific. This is not a story about American heroism, though there was plenty of that. This is not a story about superior technology, because the Japanese had better planes, better torpedoes, and more experienced pilots. This is a story about one decision, one order, 8 minutes, and how the course of World War II changed forever because of it. On the morning of June 4, 1942, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo commanded the most powerful naval strike force in history. 4 aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu. 270 aircraft, the finest carrier pilots in the world. 6 months earlier, this same force had attacked Pearl Harbor. They had destroyed the American battleship fleet. They had humiliated the United States Navy, and they had done it without losing a single carrier. Since then, Nagumo's carriers had rampaged across the Pacific. They had supported the invasion of the Philippines. They had bombed Darwin, Australia. They had raided Ceylon, now called Sri Lanka, in the Indian Ocean. They had sunk British cruisers and terrorized the Royal Navy. The Japanese called this force the Kido Butai, the Mobile Force, and for 6 months it had been unstoppable. Now, in June 1942, they were attacking Midway Island, a small American base barely 2 miles across, sitting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The plan was simple: bomb the airfield, destroy the American planes, prepare for an invasion. But Admiral Nagumo did not know that the Americans were waiting for him. The United States had broken the Japanese naval code. American intelligence officers at a secret facility in Hawaii had been reading Japanese messages for weeks. They knew the attack was coming. They knew the target was Midway, and they knew exactly when the Japanese carriers would arrive. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the American Pacific Fleet, had positioned 3 aircraft carriers northeast of Midway: the Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. They were hidden beyond the horizon, waiting in ambush. The Japanese had no idea they were there. At 4:30 in the morning, Nagumo launched his first attack wave against Midway Island. 108 aircraft, bombers and fighters. Their mission was to destroy the American airfield and prepare the island for invasion. The strike commander was Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, a veteran pilot, experienced and professional. He led his planes toward Midway through the darkness. At 6:16 in the morning, they attacked. The raid was successful. Japanese bombs hit the airfield, destroyed buildings, and set fuel tanks on fire. But as Tomonaga circled overhead, he saw something that worried him. American planes were still taking off. The runway was damaged, but not destroyed. The base was still operational. At 7 o'clock, Tomonaga radioed back to the carriers. His message was clear: there is need for a second attack. This message created a problem for Admiral Nagumo, a serious problem. His carriers still had 102 aircraft on their decks. These planes were armed and ready to launch, but they were not armed for attacking an island. They were armed for attacking ships. Japanese doctrine was very clear: always keep half your aircraft ready to attack enemy ships, because in carrier warfare, the first strike is everything. Whoever launches first usually wins. These 102 planes on Nagumo's decks were equipped with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, weapons designed to sink ships, not destroy runways. If an American carrier appeared, Nagumo could launch immediately and destroy it. But now Tomonaga was saying Midway needed a second attack, and the planes on deck were armed with the wrong weapons. Nagumo faced a choice: keep the planes armed for ships, or rearm them for a second strike on Midway. At 7:15 in the morning, he made his decision. Rearm the planes, change the torpedoes to land bombs, prepare for a second attack on Midway. It seemed like a reasonable decision, logical even. There were no American carriers in the area. Japanese reconnaissance planes had been searching since dawn. They had found nothing. The ocean was empty. So Nagumo gave the order. Rearm all aircraft for a second attack against Midway. On the hangar decks below, the crews went to work. They removed the heavy torpedoes from the planes. They replaced them with land bombs. This was not a simple job. Each torpedo weighed 800 kilograms. The bombs weighed 250 kilograms. Everything had to be done by hand. The removed torpedoes were placed on trolleys and rolled to the side of the hangar. The plan was to take them below to the magazine later. But right now, speed was more important than safety. The torpedoes were left sitting in the hangar, right next to the aircraft. This would become very important in exactly 1 hour. At 7:28 in the morning, just 13 minutes after Nagumo gave the rearming order, something happened that changed everything. A Japanese reconnaissance seaplane radioed a message. The pilot reported sighting American ships. 10 ships, bearing 010 degrees, distance 240 miles from Midway. Nagumo read the message. 10 ships, probably cruisers and destroyers. Not a major threat. He had 4 carriers. The Americans had none in the area. Or so he thought. He sent a message back to the reconnaissance plane. Investigate and identify ship types. Then he continued preparing for the second attack on Midway. But at 7:45, another message arrived from the scout plane. This message made Nagumo's blood run cold. Enemy force includes what appears to be 1 carrier. 1 carrier. Suddenly everything changed. If there was an American carrier out there, Nagumo had to attack it immediately. Carriers were the priority. Carriers were everything. Midway Island could wait. But his planes were armed with land bombs, not torpedoes. They were equipped for attacking an island, not a carrier. To sink a carrier, you need torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs. Land bombs would barely scratch a carrier's armored deck. He had to rearm the planes again, change the land bombs back to torpedoes. At 7:45 in the morning, Nagumo gave a second order. Rearm all aircraft with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs for attack on enemy carrier. On the hangar decks, the exhausted crews received the new order. They had just finished removing torpedoes and installing land bombs. Now they had to reverse everything. They began removing the land bombs. They began reattaching the torpedoes. The same torpedoes they had removed 45 minutes earlier. But there was another problem. A much bigger problem. At 7:55 in the morning, Nagumo's first strike wave was returning from Midway. 108 aircraft, low on fuel, some damaged by American anti-aircraft fire. They needed to land immediately, or they would crash into the ocean. Japanese carriers could not launch and recover aircraft at the same time. The flight deck had to be clear for landing. This meant Nagumo could not launch his second strike until all the Midway planes had landed and been taken below to the hangar. Nagumo gave the order, "Recover all aircraft. Postpone launch of second strike." The carriers turned into the wind. The flight deck crews prepared to receive the returning planes. One by one, the aircraft from Midway landed. The deck crews pushed each plane onto the elevator and sent it below to the hangar deck. This process took time, precious time. While the Japanese carriers were recovering aircraft, the American carriers were launching theirs. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the USS Enterprise and Hornet had received the first reports of the Japanese carrier position. At 7:38, they began launching their attack planes. The American strike force was not coordinated. It was not elegant. The torpedo bombers launched first. The dive bombers launched later. The fighters got confused and went to the wrong location. Nothing went according to plan. But they were in the air, and they were heading toward the Japanese carriers. By 8:20 in the morning, all of Nagumo's planes from Midway had landed. The flight deck was clear. Now the crews had to bring up the second strike from the hangar and position them for launch. But the hangar deck was chaos. Aircraft were parked everywhere. Torpedoes and bombs were scattered across the deck. Some planes were still being rearmed. The fuel hoses were out, topping off the tanks. Everything was ready for launch, but nothing was organized. At 8:37 in the morning, Japanese lookouts spotted aircraft approaching from the east. American planes. The first wave was torpedo bombers from the USS Hornet. 15 Douglas Devastator aircraft. Slow, obsolete planes. They came in low just above the water, heading straight for the carriers. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol, the Zero fighters circling above the carriers, dove on them immediately. The Zeros were faster, more maneuverable, and flown by expert pilots. The American torpedo bombers didn't have a chance. The Zeros shot them down one after another. The bombers fell into the ocean, trailing smoke and fire. Out of 15 Devastators from Hornet's Torpedo Squadron 8, 14 were destroyed. Only one pilot survived. Not a single torpedo hit a Japanese carrier. At 9 o'clock, more American torpedo bombers arrived. This time from the Enterprise and Yorktown. 14 from the Enterprise, 12 from the Yorktown. 26 more planes. Again, the Zeros attacked. Again, the slow American torpedo bombers were slaughtered. Only 7 out of 26 survived. The ocean was full of burning aircraft and men in the water. And again, not a single torpedo hit a carrier. To the Japanese, it looked like a complete victory. The Americans had thrown everything at them and failed. Not one ship was damaged. On the Japanese carriers, the mood was almost confident. The American attack had been defeated. Now it was time to counterattack. The planes on deck were almost ready. The rearming was nearly complete. In 10 more minutes, maybe 15, they would launch. And then they would destroy the American carriers. But the Japanese had made one critical mistake. Their fighters, the Zeros protecting the carriers, were all at low altitude. They had been pulled down to sea level chasing the American torpedo bombers. And high above, at 19,000 feet, 3 squadrons of American dive bombers had just arrived. At 10:22 in the morning, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, flying from the USS Enterprise, looked down and saw the Japanese carriers. 4 of them, steaming in formation, turning into the wind to launch aircraft. Their decks were full of planes, fully fueled, fully armed, preparing for takeoff. McCluskey radioed his squadrons. "Attack!" 37 Douglas Dauntless. Dive bombers pushed over into their attack dive. They fell from the sky at nearly 300 miles per hour, aiming for the carriers below. The Japanese saw them too late. The Zeros were still at sea level. They had no time to climb. The anti-aircraft guns opened fire, but the dive bombers were coming too fast, from too high. At 10:26 in the morning, the first bomb hit the Akagi. The bomb weighed 1,000 pounds. It punched through the wooden flight deck and exploded in the hangar below. The hangar was packed with aircraft. Fully fueled aircraft, with fuel hoses still attached, and scattered everywhere on the deck were the torpedoes. The same torpedoes that had been removed and removed again during the morning's confusion. The bomb's explosion ignited the fuel ignited the other aircraft, and then the torpedoes began to explode. One after another, the torpedoes detonated. Each explosion triggered more explosions. The entire hangar became an inferno. Fire roared through the ship. Secondary explosions blew holes in the deck. Smoke poured into the sky. Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, was burning out of control. 30 seconds later, the Kaga was hit. 3 bombs. 1 hit near the forward elevator, 1 hit amidships, 1 hit near the bridge. All 3 bombs penetrated to the hangar deck. The same chaos of fuel, ammunition, and torpedoes. Kaga exploded from within. Massive fireballs erupted from the hangar. The ship's forward section was blown completely apart. Within minutes, the entire carrier was engulfed in flames. At the same time, dive bombers from the USS Yorktown attacked the Soryu. 3 bombs hit in rapid succession. The carrier's deck split open. Fire consumed the ship. Explosions tore through the hull. In less than 6 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were burning wrecks. The 4th carrier, Hiryu, was not hit in this attack. She was sailing slightly apart from the others. The American dive bombers did not see her. Hiryu would survive for a few more hours. She would launch a counterattack and damage the USS Yorktown. But that afternoon, American dive bombers would find her and destroy her too. By the end of June 4th, all 4 of Admiral Nagumo's carriers were gone. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. All sunk or sinking. The most powerful carrier force in the world had been destroyed in one day, and it all came down to 8 minutes. 8 minutes between 10:22, when the American dive bombers began their attack, and 10:30, when 3 carriers were burning and the battle was essentially over. But the real decision, the one that sealed Japan's fate, happened earlier. At 7:15 in the morning, when Admiral Nagumo ordered his planes rearmed for a second attack on Midway. If Nagumo had kept his aircraft armed with torpedoes, if he had kept them ready for a carrier attack, the outcome might have been very different. When the American carriers were spotted, he could have launched immediately. His strike would have been in the air before the American planes arrived. Instead, his planes were on deck, partially armed, surrounded by fuel and ammunition. Helpless. The rearming decision created the chaos on the hangar decks. The chaos created the vulnerability. And the vulnerability turned 3 bomb hits into 3 catastrophic losses. But why did Nagumo make this decision? Was he incompetent? Was he foolish? No, he was following standard Japanese doctrine. The doctrine said to attack Midway first, then deal with any enemy ships that appeared. The doctrine assumed Japanese reconnaissance would find American carriers early, giving plenty of time to prepare. But the reconnaissance failed. The scout plane that found the American carriers launched late. It was delayed by mechanical problems. If it had launched on time, Nagumo would have known about the carriers earlier, before he ordered the rearming. There was also confusion about the enemy force. The first message said 10 ships. The second message said includes what appears to be 1 carrier. The scout pilot was not certain. Nagumo had to make decisions based on incomplete information. And finally, there was the pressure of the returning Midway strike. Those planes were low on fuel. If Nagumo did not recover them immediately, he would lose 108 aircraft and their crews. That was unacceptable. So Nagumo made what seemed like reasonable decisions based on the information available. Rearm for Midway, recover the strike planes, then rearm for carriers, then launch. But war does not reward reasonable decisions. War rewards correct decisions. And the correct decision, in hindsight, was to keep the planes armed for carriers. Always. Even if it meant sacrificing the second strike on Midway, because carriers are everything. Carriers decide battles. Carriers decide wars. The Battle of Midway was the turning point of the Pacific War. Before Midway, Japan was winning. After Midway, Japan was losing. The 4 carriers lost at Midway represented 1/3 of Japan's total carrier strength. But more importantly, they represented years of experience. The pilots who died at Midway were irreplaceable veterans, men who had trained for years, men who had fought at Pearl Harbor, in the Philippines, at Ceylon. Japan would build new carriers, but they could not replace the pilots. Not quickly, not with the same quality. The United States, by contrast, was just beginning its industrial mobilization. American shipyards were building new carriers at an incredible rate. By 1944, the U.S. Navy would have over 100 aircraft carriers of all types. Japan could not compete with American industrial power. They knew this. Their only hope was to win a quick, decisive victory, to destroy the American carrier fleet, to force a negotiated peace before American factories could turn the tide. Midway was supposed to be that decisive victory. Instead, it became Japan's decisive defeat. Admiral Yamamoto, the commander of the Japanese combined fleet, was devastated when he learned of the disaster. He immediately ordered a retreat. The invasion of Midway was cancelled. The fleet withdrew. Yamamoto understood what had happened. Japan's offensive power in the Pacific had been broken. From now on, they would be on the defensive. And he was right. After Midway, Japan never won another major naval battle. They fought desperately. They fought courageously. But they were always reacting to American moves, never initiating their own. The United States invaded Guadalcanal 2 months after Midway, then Tarawa, then the Marshall Islands, then the Marianas. Each battle brought American forces closer to Japan. Japanese carriers participated in 2 more major battles: the Philippine Sea in June 1944 and Leyte Gulf in October 1944. Both were disasters for Japan. In the Philippine Sea, Japan lost 3 carriers and over 400 aircraft in what American pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. At Leyte Gulf, Japan lost 4 carriers. By this point, they had no trained pilots left. The carriers sailed into battle with almost no aircraft. They were used as decoys to draw American attention away from the battleships. By the end of 1944, Japan's carrier force was effectively gone. Not because they ran out of ships, but because they ran out of pilots. And it all traced back to Midway, to those 4 carriers lost in 8 minutes on June 4th, 1942. Modern historians and military analysts have studied the Battle of Midway extensively. It is taught at naval academies around the world as a case study in carrier warfare, intelligence, and decision-making under pressure. Some historians argue that Nagumo was unfairly blamed for the defeat. They point out that he was following orders and doctrine, that he was working with incomplete intelligence, that any commander would have made similar decisions. Other historians argue that Nagumo was too cautious, that a more aggressive commander would have kept the strike force armed for carriers at all times, that he should have launched immediately when the American carriers were spotted, even with land bombs. Both perspectives have merit. What is undeniable is that the Battle of Midway demonstrates how quickly fortune can shift in war. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Japan was winning. At 10:30, Japan had lost. 8 minutes. The decision to rearm the aircraft was not, by itself, the cause of defeat, but it created the conditions that made defeat possible. It put fuel and ammunition on the hangar decks at exactly the moment when American dive bombers arrived. Without that chaos, without those scattered torpedoes and fuel hoses, the 3 bomb hits might not have been catastrophic. The fires might have been controlled. The carriers might have survived. But with that chaos, the fires were uncontrollable, and the carriers were doomed. For the United States, Midway was the victory that changed everything. It proved that American carriers could defeat Japanese carriers. It proved that American intelligence, having broken the Japanese codes, could provide decisive advantages. And it proved that American industry, building new ships faster than Japan could sink them, would eventually win the war. For Japan, Midway was the defeat that revealed the truth. They could not win a long war against the United States. Their only hope had been a short war, a quick victory. Midway closed that door forever. Admiral Nagumo survived the battle. He transferred his flag to a cruiser after Akagi was hit. He continued to serve in the Japanese Navy. In July 1944, during the Battle of Saipan, he was trapped on the island by advancing American forces. Rather than surrender, he committed suicide. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, the American dive bomber commander who led the attack on the Japanese carriers, survived the war. He retired from the Navy as a rear admiral. He died in 1976 at the age of 66. Lieutenant Chuichi Tomonaga, the Japanese strike commander who requested the second attack on Midway, also survived the morning's disaster. That afternoon, he led Hiryu's counterattack against the USS Yorktown. His plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire. Rather than turn back, he deliberately crashed his damaged aircraft into the ocean near the American fleet. He was 29 years old. The 4 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, aviation, and Hiryu, all sank on June the 4th or June the 5th. Their wrecks lay on the bottom of the Pacific for decades. In 1998, a deep-sea expedition found Yorktown. In 1999, they found Kaga. In 2017, they found Akagi. In 2019, they found Hiryu. Soryu has not been found yet. These wrecks are war graves. Thousands of men died on these ships. They remain entombed in the wreckage, 3 miles below the surface. The Battle of Midway is remembered every year on June 4th. Veterans, historians, and naval enthusiasts gather to commemorate the battle and honor those who fought. In Japan, the battle is remembered as a tragic turning point. The moment when Japan's offensive power was broken. The moment when defeat became inevitable. In the United States, the battle is remembered as a triumph of intelligence, courage, and timing. The moment when the Pacific War turned in America's favor. Both perspectives are true. War is decided by moments, by decisions made under pressure with incomplete information, by 8 minutes that change the course of history. Admiral Nagumo made a decision at 7:15 on the morning of June 4, 1942. He ordered his aircraft rearmed for a second strike on Midway. It was a reasonable decision, it was a logical decision, and 8 minutes of combat on that same morning proved it was the wrong decision. 4 carriers burned, Japan's offensive died, and the war in the Pacific was effectively over. All because of 8 minutes. If you found this deep dive into one of World War II's most decisive moments as compelling as we hoped, we would be honored if you would subscribe. These stories of strategic decisions and their consequences deserve to be told with the detail and respect they require. History is not just about victories and defeats. It is about decisions. About the 8 minutes that change everything. About the commanders who make choices with incomplete information and must live with the consequences. We bring you these stories every week. Stories of battles won and lost, of technology and tactics, of courage and failure. If you value this kind of detailed historical analysis, your subscription helps us continue this work. And we have one question for you. Where are you watching from? Are you in the United States, Japan, Britain, or somewhere else entirely? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for learning. And thank you for ensuring that the lessons of June 4th, 1942 are not forgotten.